Right now, the second largest megacity on Earth is actively drowning. To save it, a global superpower is doing something completely wild, abandoning its home and spending billions to build a new capital from scratch, deep inside a tropical rainforest. And this Indonesia's greatest gamble. But what if this desperate escape is already turning into a catastrophic disaster? Welcome back to GeoAtlas. When we examine the global map of human civilization, few nations command as much silent weight as Indonesia. It stands officially as the fourth largest country in the world by population, acting as a massive geopolitical anchor in Southeast Asia. At the absolute heart of this archipelago sits its chaotic capital, Jakarta, a monstrous metropolitan engine that is currently home to over 32 million people, making it the second largest metro region on the entire planet. But beneath the neon lights and towering skyscrapers lies a terrifying ticking clock. Jakarta is sinking fast. Confronted by an existential crisis of biblical proportions, the Indonesian government is currently executing a wild, unprecedented geopolitical maneuver. They are building an entirely new capital city from scratch, carving it directly out of the dense, untamed jungles of Borneo. However, moving a nation's soul is never simple. Behind the futuristic blueprints, the grim reality is that this brand new megaproject is already showing signs of turning into an absolute disaster. So, what hidden mechanics are causing Jakarta to structurally fail, and what exactly is going so horribly wrong in this new city? As always, the answers are not found in political promises, but written directly into Indonesia's unique, uncompromising, and brutal geographic constraints. Imagine a country so geographically shattered that it shouldn't even exist under a single flag. A nation of 17,000 islands trapped on a volcanic ring of fire, holding a supervolcano that once almost wiped out the entire human race. This is the volatile reality of Indonesia, a geographic masterpiece that built the world's most chaotic megacity, only for the ocean to slowly claim it back. To truly understand why a nation would desperately abandon its own capital, you first have to look at the sheer, impossible layout of the country itself. Indonesia stands officially as the world's largest archipelagic country, a colossal maritime puzzle made up of over 17,000 islands straddling the equator between the Pacific and Indian Oceans. This means that Indonesia sits directly on top of one of the most critical crossroads of global maritime trade and historic cultural exchange, occupying an incredibly valuable, high-stakes position between East Asia, Australia, and India. But this geography is not defined merely by its massive size. It is largely defined by its brutal fragmentation. The country stretches an unbelievable 5,000 kilometers from west to east. Its territory ranges from massive, continent-sized landmasses like Sumatra, Java, Sulawesi, and Borneo, which it shares with Malaysia and Brunei, to smaller, isolated island groups like the Maluku Islands and the remote, dense province of Papua. This deeply fractured geography has created profound, systemic logistical challenges throughout Indonesia's history. It has forced generations to battle extreme difficulties in central governance, infrastructure development, transportation, and even basic national cohesion. Yet, this exact same isolation has also led to some of the most incredible biodiversity and cultural diversity on Earth, as virtually each island and region developed its own distinct language, unique customs, and separate identity. In many ways, when looking at the map, it is historically shocking that Indonesia managed to become a single, unified country at all. But if there is one terrifying thing that all these 17,000 islands share, it is a particularly volatile and dangerous geography. You see, Indonesia sits directly along the treacherous Pacific Ring of Fire. This tectonic placement gives the country its rugged, jaw-dropping topography and its hyper-fertile volcanic soils, but it also curses the population with frequent, devastating seismic activities. Active volcanoes completely dominate much of the interior of Java and Bali, while catastrophic earthquakes and tsunamis remain a persistent daily threat to millions. In fact, Indonesia is home to one of the world's few active supervolcanoes, responsible for almost ending human history. Around 75,000 years ago, the Toba supervolcano, which today sits quietly under Lake Toba on the island of Sumatra, violently erupted. The cataclysm caused a devastating 10-year volcanic winter that altered the global climate and endangered human beings in their very early, fragile stage of evolutionary development. Suffice it to say, Indonesia is a country deeply defined by volcanoes, and these specific explosive mountains have played a massive, understated role in how humans have physically evolved over the millennia. Overall, the country's climate is intensely tropical and humid, with relentless monsoon cycles fundamentally shaping its agriculture and seasonal rhythms. Java, in particular, stands out as a hyper-fertile island, enriched by volcanic ash, making it the most densely populated and stressed part of Indonesia. Naturally, it is also home to the country's sprawling, suffocating capital city, Jakarta. Jakarta is located directly on the northwest coast of Java, facing the unpredictable Java Sea. Long before it became the high-stakes capital of a major global nation, it operated as a pretty modest, quiet port town called Sunda Kelapa, which was ruled as part of the Hindu Sunda kingdom. In fact, it wouldn't be until the heavy boot of European colonization stepped onto the island that Jakarta would begin its chaotic transformation into the monstrous megacity we see today. This explosive growth started after Sunda Kelapa was violently seized and officially renamed Batavia by the Dutch East India Company in 1619. Under strict Dutch colonial rule, Batavia quickly became the absolute administrative and economic nerve center of the Dutch East Indies, the Netherlands' vast, highly profitable Southeast Asian colonial empire. The city's low-lying, flat position made it ideal as a maritime port city. Given its valuable strategic location at the confluence of three large global regions, this port would directly inject immense growth and wealth into the veins of Indonesia and Batavia. But geography always demands a price. Given that Batavia was built on a dangerously low-lying coastal plain, this choice also meant the city was inherently, profoundly vulnerable to severe flooding, a structural flaw that will become terrifyingly important later on in this video. After Indonesia finally broke its chains and gained independence in 1945, Batavia was permanently renamed Jakarta, and the city quickly entered a hyperphase of chaotic growth. Its population completely exploded. As Indonesia rapidly industrialized and urbanized in the post-war era, the nation's wealth became heavily concentrated in this single coastal basket. Millions of citizens migrated to the city from poor, rural provinces in a desperate search for work, modernization, and economic opportunity. As such, Jakarta successfully became Indonesia's beating political heart, its undisputed economic engine, and the ultimate prideful symbol of its post-colonial nationhood. But Jakarta's rapid, unchecked rise came with deep, fatal structural issues. Unlike many planned capitals around the world, Jakarta developed with total anonymity to city planning, growing chaotically without cohesive zoning or proper investment in long-term infrastructure. As the country's economy grew at a breakneck pace, so did Jakarta's legendary gridlock traffic, systemic inequality, and severe environmental strain. The city became deeply emblematic of modern Indonesia's growth, highly ambitious and dynamic, but stretched to its absolute breaking limit by the staggering weight of its own complexity. Ultimate reality has caught up with the capital. The exact coastal geography that made Jakarta so attractive as a historic trading hub has officially transformed into a lethal liability in the modern era. And those geographical tensions have only worsened to a point of no return in recent decades. Imagine a megacity of 34 million people literally collapsing under its own weight, sinking up to 20 centimeters every single year. This isn't a slow climate forecast. It's a terrifying race against time, where a third of a nation's beating heart could be completely erased by the ocean in just 25 years. This is the dark reality of Jakarta. Right now, beneath the flashing neon lights and bustling streets, Jakarta is actively sinking into the earth. The city is unfortunately built on a hyper-vulnerable, low-lying coastal plain where much of the urban sprawl sits less than 10 meters above sea level. In some of the hardest-hit northern neighborhoods, the reality is even more grim. The land has already dropped entirely below the ocean line. Historically, the city's natural geography, flat, marshy, and heavily crisscrossed by rivers prone to flooding, has always made it an unstable place for a massive civilization. However, modern human engineering and rapid, uncontrolled urbanization have catastrophically accelerated this structural crisis. Over the last few decades, Jakarta's population has completely exploded, putting an immense, unsustainable pressure on its fragile infrastructure. When you factor in the entire, sprawling metropolitan area, Jakarta stands as the second largest metro region on Earth, holding nearly 34 million people. To put this massive human weight into perspective, this places it just behind Tokyo's historic 39 million people. But there is a massive, dangerous difference between the two titans. Unlike Tokyo, which was already home to millions of citizens as early as 1750 and had centuries to gradually adapt, Jakarta didn't even hit the 1 million person milestone until about 1945. Therefore, its modern growth has been violently explosive compared to almost any other megacity around the world. And at the end of the day, when a city explodes that fast, there is really no logical way for a government to properly plan for or manage that chaotic amount of growth. Because the state failed to provide adequate access to piped water for these newly migrated millions, residents and massive commercial industries took survival into their own hands. They began drilling thousands of illegal wells, deeply tapping into the city's delicate underground aquifers. This desperate solution came with a nasty, fatal side effect. As the critical groundwater was aggressively drained, the porous soil above began to compress and collapse, causing the land itself to structurally sink. In fact, the physics of this collapse are terrifying, with some coastal areas of the city now sinking by as much as 10 to 20 centimeters per year. This means that by 2050, just 25 years from today, it is officially projected that nearly a third of Jakarta could be entirely swallowed underwater. Compounding this existential threat is Jakarta's deeply inadequate drainage system, completely clogged concrete canals, and an aging, crumbling flood control network. Given that Jakarta sits directly in a volatile tropical region with a distinct heavy wet season and dry season, seasonal monsoons regularly inundate the concrete landscape. Today, global climate change is only increasing the sheer severity and unpredictability of these weather events. Together, the combination of rising global sea levels, heavier tropical rains, and worsening maritime storms means the city now routinely experiences catastrophic floods that violently displace thousands of people almost every single year. At the same time, Jakarta's suffocating air pollution, legendary gridlock traffic, and severe overcrowding have turned it into one of the least livable and most stressful capitals in the entire world. The staggering weight of administrative duties, economic centralization, and raw population pressures all converge here simultaneously, making the city increasingly difficult, if not completely impossible, to govern. All of this combined makes for a metropolis where it is quite frankly challenging to see any viable future for the next generation. It is a geographic trap, and because of these compounding, inescapable challenges, the Indonesian government has finally been forced to abandon its historic home and consider something truly radical, moving its capital entirely to a brand new city. To escape a drowning home, a nation is spending $30 billion to build a futuristic capital deep inside an ancient rainforest. But what happens when the money runs out? The jungle fights back, and the grand blueprint turns into a silent, skeletal ghost town. This is the final chapter of Indonesia's desperate urban gamble. In 2019, faced with the catastrophic reality of a drowning metropolis, then-President Joko Widodo made a historic announcement that stunned the geopolitical world. The official seat of Indonesia's government would permanently shift away from Jakarta. The destination? A brand new, multi-billion-dollar capital city called Nusantara, engineered completely from scratch on the rugged island of Borneo, tucked deep within the remote province of East Kalimantan. According to the official blueprint, this new capital would not completely replace Jakarta as the nation's financial engine, but it would fully assume the high-stakes role of national government headquarters. It was designed to house the president, the parliament, central ministries, and all key administrative functions. Naturally, the logic behind this radical exodus was partly purely geographic. East Kalimantan is situated comfortably far from the archipelago's volatile earthquake zones, is inherently less prone to catastrophic flooding, and sits roughly at the absolute geographical center of the Indonesian map. But the move was also deeply symbolic. It was calculated to signal a more balanced, modernized, and forward-looking Indonesia, one that no longer revolved entirely around the overcrowded and collapsing island of Java. In public theory, Nusantara was aggressively pitched to international investors as a smart, eco-friendly, and sustainable paradise powered 100% by renewable energy. It was systematically designed with expansive green corridors, hyper-efficient public transportation networks, and next-generation high-speed digital infrastructure. On paper, it was supposed to seamlessly avoid the structural nightmares that plague Jakarta by being built with the absolute future of human engineering in mind. But from the very beginning, expert critics and economists heavily questioned whether this utopian plan was ever realistic, especially when factoring in the astronomical financial costs, the severe environmental impact, and the underlying political motivations driving the clock. Nusantara was supposed to be Indonesia's grand urban reset, but the dream has tragically not gone according to plan. This failure is driven by a myriad of compounding reasons, but none are as unforgiving as the raw physical geography of Indonesia's new capital. You see, the chosen site of the city itself, carved directly out of the dense, untamed rainforests of East Kalimantan, poses immense, near impossible logistical and environmental barriers. Building a massive modern metropolis in such an isolated and ecologically sensitive ecosystem has required brutal, large-scale deforestation. This aggressive land clearing is actively displacing local wildlife and severely threatening the fragile habitats of endangered species like the native orangutans. At the same time, vulnerable indigenous communities have raised intense concerns, fearing that their ancestral lands would be violently pushed aside and that they would be completely excluded from critical state decision-making and land use planning, a dark premonition that has largely turned out to be true. Furthermore, rather than relying on local labor to boost employment for the people of Kalimantan, the government strategically imported a massive workforce of over 100,000 Indonesian and migrant laborers to construct the heavy foundations. And as you can easily imagine, this hyper-accelerated jungle construction has come with an absolutely staggering price tag. Let's get straight to the point. The sheer cost of Nusantara is spiraling out of control. Official estimates have drastically ballooned to well over $30 billion, a monstrous number that continues to rise daily due to systemic supply chain delays and crushing global inflation. And while the state confidently insists that the vast majority of this funding will eventually be covered by private investment, global investors have been incredibly slow to commit their capital. In fact, deep financial analysis reveals that international markets are extremely wary of throwing millions into what is widely perceived as a politically driven legacy project with a highly volatile and uncertain return on investment. As a direct result, construction timelines have significantly slipped, key building targets have been repeatedly missed, and much of what has actually been constructed on the ground so far remains completely skeletal or purely symbolic. Even as the administration desperately pushes forward, laying ceremonial cornerstones, hosting lavish state events, and repeatedly promising that thousands of bureaucrats will relocate, there is widespread global skepticism that the city will ever function as a true operational capital in the near term. Simultaneously, Jakarta stubbornly remains the undisputed economic, corporate, and cultural core of the entire country. No serious, viable plan currently exists to relocate the millions of private sector jobs, financial institutions, or massive corporate infrastructures that have been meticulously built there over generations. Nusantara may one day hold a finished parliament building and a grand presidential residence, but real global power and human activity are destined to remain locked in Java for decades to come. This gridlock reflects a broader, systemic tension in Indonesian politics, a rigid, top-down vision of forced modernization that routinely sidelines local voices in favor of national spectacle. Of course, Indonesia is not the first superpower to attempt this kind of high-stakes urban pivot. Brazil famously built Brasília back in the 1960s to aggressively shift its political power inward from its crowded coastal cities, hoping to better integrate the state with its vast, untamed interior. Nigeria similarly moved its capital away from the chaos of Lagos to Abuja for identical reasons, citing extreme overcrowding, ethnic neutrality, and geographic centrality. Kazakhstan also famously transformed a freezing, remote provincial outpost into its gleaming, ultra-modern capital, now known as Astana, filling the steppe with futuristic architecture to symbolize raw national ambition. Even Myanmar attempted a dramatic, secretive capital relocation to the massive void of Naypyidaw, though its bizarre, sprawling, and completely empty highways became far more infamous than inspiring to the world. All of these artificial cities share a common, dangerous psychological thread. They were built to be absolute statements of state control, national unity, and modern dominance, but their long-term historical success has varied wildly. Brasília and Abuja eventually managed to establish themselves as legitimate, crowded seats of power, though both still suffer from severe economic inequality and isolation. Astana dazzles on corporate brochures, but completely lacks organic, vibrant civil life, while Naypyidaw remains a capital in name only, functioning more like an empty government fortress than a living, breathing city. Indonesia's new capital, Nusantara, currently still in its fragile infancy, teeters precariously somewhere between these historic examples. Its ultimate survival depends not on structural construction progress, but on whether real people, civil servants, families, and private businesses actually choose to leave their lives behind and move there. If they refuse, Nusantara may end up less like a triumphant national project and more like a multi-billion-dollar monument to political overreach. Today, Nusantara is not quite the true capital, but it also kind of is. Some high-profile government functions, such as hosting the grand celebrations of the country's independence, have been officially moved to the Borneo site. Yet, the vast majority of the day-to-day, critical activities of running the country remain firmly anchored in Jakarta. In this fragmented way, Indonesia currently operates a bit like a split country. To make matters worse, while many landmark buildings, such as the eagle-shaped presidential palace, ministry offices, and high-rise residential towers, have successfully been erected, the city's actual permanent population remains stagnated well below 500,000 people. While that might not sound terrible for a brand new town, it is anemic and practically invisible compared to the massive, roaring human entity that is Jakarta. For former President Joko Widodo, Nusantara was explicitly engineered to be his ultimate unshakable legacy. But with his term officially over and international doubts about the city's success growing by the day, the future of Nusantara is becoming increasingly unclear. Some fear it will inevitably transform into a massive white elephant, half-built, drastically underused, and completely forgotten by history. Others see it as a well-intentioned geographical idea, executed in the absolute wrong place, at the wrong time, and for the wrong political reasons. Either way, Nusantara now stands as a powerful, cautionary tale about the strict limitations of trying to build a nation's future on symbolic geography alone. Indonesia is trapped in a fascinating existential dilemma. Its primary city and historic soul is rapidly sinking into the ocean, and yet, relocating its entire heartbeat to somewhere more stable has turned out to be a multi-billion-dollar boondoggle. Where does the country go from here? No one can truly say. Thank you for watching GeoAtlas. If you found this deep dive into Indonesia's crisis fascinating, you will definitely be interested in our previous video exploring the mysterious secrets of the South Atlantic flight void. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in our next global exploration. Goodbye.